The college football season is in full swing. Week 1 is in the books, and it's time to look ahead to week number 2 of the 2023 college football season. And before I get to the picks this week, I have a top 25 ranking, and I'm going to put that in the comment section down below. And I'm going to do that every single week this season. And once we get to the college football playoff committee rankings, I will in all likelihood provide a segment for my top 10 ranking, just like I did last season and the season before that. The 7 games being predicted on the channel this week: Nebraska and Colorado, Iowa and Iowa State, Notre Dame and NC State, Oregon and Texas Tech, Texas A&M and Miami, the Hurricanes, Ole Miss and Tulane, and our game of the week, a top 10 showdown in Tuscaloosa, Texas and Alabama. If there is a game that I'm not predicting on the channel this week that you would like my opinion on, please leave that in the comments section down below and I will respond to you. Without further ado, let's get to the week 2 college football predictions. Our first matchup on the docket this week, Nebraska and Colorado. And there was some beef between Matt Rule and Deion Sanders in the offseason that I think a lot of people have forgotten all about. They were talking about each other, going back and forth. Now, what's interesting about this matchup is how are these two teams going to respond to last week? And these two teams, they had different outcomes. Colorado is coming off of an emotional win over TCU in Deion Sanders' head coaching debut in the FBS. Nebraska, they're coming off a heartbreaking loss to Minnesota in a game where they should have won that game. For Nebraska, it was the same old story in a different year, different coaching staff. Another one-possession loss. How will they bounce back from that going on the road to take on Colorado in the first home game in the Deion Sanders era? Last week for Colorado, Shedeur Sanders, 510 passing yards, which was a Colorado school record, by the way, and 4 touchdown passes. And he looked phenomenal in the game last week against TCU as he avoided harassment. He was not panicked. He was not flustered in the pocket. Dylan Edwards, 4 total touchdowns last week for the Buffaloes. Travis Hunter playing all 145 snaps in the game. He had an interception on defense, and on offense, 11 catches, 119 yards. The one thing that I think is going to go right in Nebraska's favor in this matchup is the lack of defense Colorado showed against TCU last week. TCU ran for 269 rushing yards against that Colorado defense last week. Gabe Ervin Jr. averaged nearly 8 yards per carry last week against Minnesota, and Jeff Sims had 91 rushing yards last week. Now, I'm not taking away anything Colorado did last week in their upset victory over TCU, being a 3-touchdown underdog. But TCU really beat themselves in that game. They had 2 red zone interceptions, including one in the end zone, and a missed field goal. So TCU, they really left, honestly, about 17 points on the scoreboard, as TCU could have won that game by maybe 2 touchdowns. Again, not taking away anything Colorado did last week, but TCU really beat themselves in that matchup. And I will be honest, this feels like a coin flip game to me, because I do think Nebraska's defense is a lot better than TCU's defense. And this will be a big test for Colorado. And I think a matchup like this could potentially set the tone for how the rest of Colorado's season will go. But I am picking Colorado in this matchup. I think Nebraska's defense is going to hold their own this game, but until the offense shows something, until Jeff Sims can show something through the air, I just can't pick Nebraska. And I'm going with Colorado. Our next matchup, Iowa and Iowa State. Now, this may be the battle for the Cy-Hawk Trophy, but I am calling this game the Gamblers Bowl. because both of these programs in the offseason got caught in 4K gambling on games. And if you're a fan of defense, this game is in all likelihood for you, as Iowa State won this game last season by a score of 10-7. Do I think this game will be 10-7 this season? I do not. Mainly because I think Cade McNamara is the quarterback that Iowa has needed for a long time now. For Iowa State, Rocco Becht, he was 10 for 13 for 113 yards and 2 touchdown passes last week against Northern Iowa, which that is a small sample size, especially against Northern Iowa, which I don't know if I can take Iowa State seriously. I can take Iowa more seriously than Iowa State. As Iowa State, it feels like to me they've had the one good season where they went to the New Year's Six, and they have just been average or even below average most years. Although they have impact players in their defense. Jeremiah Cooper had 2 interceptions last week, and Caleb Bacon had 2 sacks. And Iowa's new tight end, Luke Lachey or Luke Lachey, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, 7 catches for 73 yards last week, and perhaps he is the next great tight end of Iowa, known as Tight End U. And I am picking Iowa just for the sole fact that I can buy more into them this season than I can Iowa State. As I do think Cade McNamara, even though people are still laughing at the Iowa offense, I think that this season is going to be a little bit different for Iowa. I do think that McNamara is the kind of quarterback that I think could have this offense take a big leap compared to years past. And I'm going with the Hawkeyes. I do think we could be in for a relatively low-scoring game, but I don't think 10-7 low-scoring. The last couple times that they've faced off, a few times they've been pretty low-scoring, but I think in the neighborhood of maybe 20-14. Our third matchup on the docket, Notre Dame and NC State. Now, I could sense a potential trap game here for Notre Dame. For NC State, they have Virginia transfer Brennan Armstrong under center. And in 2021, he was 4th in the FBS in passing yards. He had 251 total yards in the win last week at UConn. But here are the differences where I think Notre Dame is going to prevail in this game, despite me thinking this could be a potential trap game. Because first of all, anybody that knows college football knows that nothing is guaranteed in college football. It doesn't matter to me who says what. The moment Appalachian State shocked Michigan in the Big House, nothing has been guaranteed in college football. Audric Estime, in 2 games this season, he is 3rd in the FBS in rushing yards with 211. Jeremiah Love is averaging over 9.5 yards per carry. NC State, they allowed 99 rushing yards to Victor Rosa last week, as well as 2 touchdowns. And I've talked about it a couple times already this season, but quarterback Sam Hartman, the Wake Forest transfer, he has a 97.1 QBR, which is 2nd in the FBS. And he has 445 passing yards this season so far, which is 9th in the FBS. And I do get that numbers like that, you can consider them to be maybe an outlier, or maybe some inconsistencies in numbers, considering Notre Dame is one of the few teams that have played 2 games this season in week 0 and week 1. But Notre Dame's defense, they have been dominant so far. 6th in total defense, only allowing an average of 3 points per game so far in their first 2 games. And I get they were against Navy and Tennessee Tech, but I just think you can't deny the upside Notre Dame has this season. And I'm going with the Irish to prevail in this game, despite me being a little bit concerned that this could be a trap game, as road games are difficult in college football. Matchup number 4 on the docket, Oregon and Texas Tech. Or as I like to call it, the Tyler Shuck revenge game. As he was a former quarterback at Oregon, he then transferred to Texas Tech. Texas Tech, however, is coming off of a double overtime loss to Wyoming last week in heartbreaking fashion when you consider the fact Texas Tech led 17-0 after the first quarter. Oregon is coming off of an 81-7 win over Portland State, which 81 points, that is impressive, but against weak competition in Portland State. Bo Nix was 23 for 27 last week, 287 yards and 3 touchdown passes. Bucky Irving, 119 rushing yards on just 4 carries. Against Wyoming last week on the road, Tyler Shuck, 31-47, 338 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Jaron Bradley, 8 catches, 88 yards, and a touchdown. Miles Price, 6 catches, 65 yards, and a touchdown. And I'm going to be honest, I feel like this game is a coin flip. Bo Nix, throughout his career, has not done well on the road. But last season, he showed improvements on the road. His one road loss was on the road at Oregon State in a game where Oregon should have honestly won that game. They just beat themselves in that matchup. If Texas Tech would have beaten Wyoming last week, I would 100% call for the upset and say Texas Tech wins this game. But I just don't know how the Red Raiders are going to respond after losing a game where they had a 17-0 lead at the end of the first quarter. Everything was going their way. And next thing they know, they're on the losing end in a double overtime game. Would I be surprised if Texas Tech pulled off the upset? Not really. Because before recording this, I was leaning towards calling for the upset. But I am picking Oregon. If Texas Tech pulls off this upset and wins this game, I will regret it. Although this game does feel like a coin flip, if Texas Tech, with this being a 6 p.m. kickoff, a primetime game, if they're still in this game in the fourth quarter, I think there's a strong chance to pull off the upset, but I just don't see it. I think Oregon wins, but I do think Texas Tech, I think potentially they could make this a ball game. But don't be surprised about the upset. If they do, I will regret picking Oregon. Next matchup on the docket, Texas A&M and Miami. Last week, Connor Wigman for the Aggies threw for 236 yards and 5 touchdown passes. And because of that performance, he has a 97.2 QBR, which is first in the FBS. Now I get that it's just against New Mexico, but A&M fans like myself that have been following the team for the majority, if not their entire lifetime, they needed a performance like that after watching the abysmal offense all of last season. In the first game with Bobby Petrino as the offensive coordinator. And they let Bobby cook. As this game, I think that they are a team that needs to be taken seriously, the Aggies are. Evan Stewart, Noah Thompson, Nia Smith, and Moose Muhammad III. I do think that A&M has perhaps one of the best receiving cores in all of college football. Last week, Evan Stewart, 8 catches, 115 yards, 2 touchdowns. Noah Thomas, 6 catches, 74 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Nia Smith, who's back for one final season, only 3 catches and 40 yards, but he's going to have a big impact the further along the season goes. And Moose Muhammad III, 3 catches, 12 yards, and a touchdown. Miami, on the other hand, they have perhaps a very strong running game. At least a balanced running game, as last week's box score shows. Henry Parrish Jr. had 9 carries, 90 yards, and a touchdown. Mark Fletcher Jr., 9 carries, 76 yards, and a touchdown. And A.J. Allen, 9 carries for 47 yards. Tyler Van Dyke was 17 for 22, 201 passing yards, a touchdown, and an interception in last week's game against Miami, Ohio. Now, these are two very experienced teams. Last year when these two teams squared off against each other, A&M won by a score of 17-9 in a game where points were hard to come by. I think we are in for a much higher scoring game this time around. Despite the experience that both of these teams have, especially on defense. Now A&M, they have 20 returning starters this season, and that is according to the Phil Steele magazine, which when it comes to the Phil Steele magazine, the returning starters, it's kind of vague compared to Athlon Sports or Lindy's or whichever magazine you happen to look at and read during the offseason. And Miami with 19 returning starters, 10 on defense, as well as 10 on defense for the Aggies. This game feels like a tough game to call. Now A&M is about a 5-point favorite in this game, and Connor Wigman has yet to throw an interception while under center for the Aggies. And with Connor Wigman under center, the A&M offense, it is just in rhythm when he's under center. I think Connor Wigman, when it's all said and done, he's going to be the best quarterback that A&M's had other than Johnny Manziel. In this game, however, I am going to pick Miami in this one, as I do feel like that there's going to be somewhere down the line that Connor Wigman is going to have to make plays, which make plays against a strong team. And I think this is a great test for Connor Wigman, as Cameron Kitchens is perhaps one, if not the best safety in the entire country. And Miami's secondary is experienced. And their whole defense is, as I've already mentioned. Both teams' defenses are, but I'm going to pick Miami. I think this game is about which team is going to assert their strength the best, and I do think that is going to be Miami in this matchup with their running game, as I do think it's in Miami's best interest to take a page of Appalachian State's playbook last season, where they just pounded the rock, kept the A&M defense on the field, kept the offense on the sidelines, tire out the defense later on the game goes. And I'm going to pick the Hurricanes in this matchup. Next matchup, Ole Miss and Tulane. Ole Miss beat Mercer last week by a score of 73-7. Jackson Dart, he had a phenomenal performance. 18 for 23, 334 yards, 4 touchdown passes, and no interceptions. And that is a very good performance to build confidence on moving into the next week and the rest of the season. As there was a point last year where I saw a couple Ole Miss fans talk about how Jackson Dart, he can't be that guy under center. But he has this performance against Mercer last week to add to a confidence booster for the rest of the year. Quinshon Judkins, 60 yards on 13 carries, 2 touchdowns. Trey Harris had 6 catches for 133 yards and 4 touchdowns. Jordan Watkins, 111 yards on 6 catches. For Tulane, Michael Pratt was near perfect, 14 for 15, 294 yards and 4 touchdown passes. He currently has a 346.0 passer rating, which is first in the FBS. Jaquan Jackson had 2 touchdowns, 106 receiving yards on 3 catches. Lawrence Keys III, a touchdown off of 4 catches and 96 yards. And Tulane is coming off of a 37-17 win last week against South Alabama, a South Alabama team that I do think is underrated this season. I think a team that has the potential of having a very strong season. And I do want to acknowledge this is a rematch from 2021, where Ole Miss won by a score of 61-21. Now I do think Ole Miss is going to win this game, although I would not be surprised if Tulane pull off the upset, as we've seen Tulane pull off upsets before. The Cotton Bowl, for example, where USC, they relinquished a double-digit lead late in the game, and Tulane won in the waning seconds of that matchup. Now, Tulane, that Cotton Bowl win for them, it provided confidence for this season. They came close a couple years ago to upsetting Oklahoma on their home field, but they fell just short of that. So we know Tulane is a very scrappy team, and they're not going to give up by any means. But I think Ole Miss wins this game, but a lot closer than 61-21. I think at the minimum, maybe 2 touchdowns. I think this Tulane team is too scrappy of a team to lose by 40 to this Ole Miss team. And finally, our final game on the docket, our game of the week, Texas and Alabama, a top 10 showdown in Tuscaloosa. Last season, Alabama won by a score of 20-19. However, if Quinn Ewers never had to lead the game for Texas last season, I think the Longhorns win that game, I'd say pretty handily, maybe by at least 2 scores. When Quinn Ewers was in the game, Texas was moving the ball at will on that Alabama defense. 9 for 12, 134 passing yards before exiting the game towards the end of the first quarter. Alabama has a 57-game non-conference opponent winning streak. The closest to end that streak was Texas just last season. On Saturday night, there's going to be a question that will be answered that's been asked for over a decade. Is Texas back? I think with the win on Saturday night, I think it's safe to say that Texas is back. At least we will have the right to declare Texas back. There are some people that say that Texas was back when they came so close last season to beating Alabama, but they just couldn't get it done. Texas, they had to make Alabama work for that win. That was a game where Alabama, they had to grind for all 60 minutes to get that win. Alabama may be shorthanded at secondary in this matchup. Last week against Middle Tennessee State, Jalen Key and Malachi Moore, they exited the game early with injuries. So did Kool-Aid McKinstry. He took a hard hit to the head in that game. However, he was not in the concussion protocol, which is a good thing for Alabama. And it was a coach's decision to keep him out for the rest of the game, which is smart on their part. When you have the game wrapped up, rest all your players for the big match of the very next week. Because you don't want to have a big-time player suffer an injury just to pad stats and run up the score. In last year's game against the Crimson Tide, Xavier Worthy had 5 catches for 97 yards for the Longhorns. Georgia transfer Donnie Mitchell. He's going to have to have a big impact if Texas is going to pull off this upset. Last week against Rice, he had 3 catches for 26 yards and a touchdown. The Longhorns are returning 16 starters from last season, 10 on offense and 6 on defense. Alabama, they named Jalen Milroe the starting quarterback. It was a long process in the offseason, as it was a quarterback battle throughout training camp. Nobody knew who the quarterback would be for the Crimson Tide. Would it be Jalen Milroe? Would it be Tyler Bachner? Would it be Ty Simpson? But Jalen Milroe is QB1 for the Crimson Tide. And there is some talks that Jalen Milroe does have some Jalen Hurts in him. And not only will we find that out on Saturday night, but we'll find that out throughout the portion of this season. Or should I say throughout the rest of the season. Now, I do have Alabama making the college football playoff. However, I do have them losing 1 game. But they run the table, they beat Georgia in the SEC championship game, and they clinch their spot in the college football playoff. And I have that 1 loss being right here to the Texas Longhorns. Despite the tough task for Quinn Ewers to go on the road in Tuscaloosa in primetime with that crowd in Bryant-Denny Stadium and pulling off the upset, I think he's got it in him, especially seeing what he did in last season's matchup before having to exit the game. And I am going to pick the Longhorns to pull off this upset. I think of Donnie Mitchell. I think he has a big impact in this game. as well as Xavier Worthy. As I think Texas, I think they have that talent to pull off this upset, go on the road at Bryant-Denny Stadium, and pulling off the shocker. And that will do it for my Week 2 college football predictions. Like, share, comment, and subscribe. And if there was a game, or should I say if there is a game that I did not predict this week on the channel that you would like my thoughts on, please leave it in the comment section and I will respond to you. Enjoy the football this weekend. Week 2 of the college football season. The NFL is back this week. Enjoy all the football. It's great to have football back.